Hello, God bless you, and thank you for joining me again today. Dios le bendiga. Gracias por estar conmigo una vez más. We are excited about God. We are excited about everything that God has for us. Estamos gozosos, estamos contentos de lo que Dios tiene para nosotros, para ustedes. Y si Dios está haciendo cosas grandes en tu vida, pues es importante que tú lo compartas. If God is doing some great and awesome things in your life, then it's important that you share it. Because God is working, and the sad thing about these days is that people don't want to share what God is doing. Lo triste de estos días es que la gente no quiere compartir lo que Dios está haciendo. Dios está haciendo cosas grandes y nosotros pues no nos atrevemos a compartir, ni a hablar, ni a decir lo que Dios ha hecho. Y es importante que hablemos. And I like to tell you that there's so many needs out that, if we were to engage in a prayer circle, I think that our society, our communities need people to pray. And we're going to start a prayer circle at Ambassadors of Christ for this month of August, starting next Monday, and we encourage you to be a part of it. If you would like to be a part of it, just shoot me a message and we'll send you a day, and you could just pray, and I got this little card with information on how to pray and what to pray for, and I'll shoot it over to you. Hablando de oración, pues nosotros, pues embajadores de Cristo, pues vamos a estar haciendo una cadena de oración para este mes de agosto, y vamos a empezar el lunes que entra. Pero si a usted le gustaría compartir y estar con nosotros en la oración, pues avísame, mándeme un mensaje, y pues yo pues le voy a facilitar una tarjetita que tengo con instrucciones y qué hora. Suscríbase, subscribe. Press that little box right there where the arrow's pointing to, and we'll send you, information about the prayer circle. We're also doing Samaritan's Purse. We're collecting shoe boxes filled with goodies. We're going to send them over to Ukraine, to Latin America, to wherever God leads us. And we encourage you, if you would like to participate and be a part of that. Hopefully we're going to get over 100 this year for December. So by November 14th, somewhere around there, we need to have the boxes all set. So we're starting just to gather information, gather stuff. Para noviembre 15 más o menos, pues vamos a estar listos, porque vamos a recoger cajitas de zapatos con cositas dentro, botellitas, o no botellitas de agua, pero lápices y cositas para la escuela, y medias, y cartas personales que usted le quiera escribir a un niño, y se lo vamos a enviar a Ukraine o a Latinoamérica, donde haya la necesidad. Para noviembre 14 necesitamos las cajitas. Si a usted le gusta participar, pues escríbanos y se lo enviamos. Today we've been discussing First of Corinthians, and last week we were discussing chapter 3. I'm sorry. And today we're going to be discussing the title of today's discussion is servant leader, and this week we're going to be discussing faithful servant. First of Corinthians chapter 4. Hemos estado estudiando la carta hacia los Corintios, la epístola. Entonces, la semana pasada hablamos del capítulo 3, y esta semana, pues hoy, pues vamos a estar hablando del capítulo 4. Y el título de la lección de hoy, pues, es el siervo fiel. Y vamos a estar leyendo capítulo 4, verso 1 y 2. We're going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1. I just want to stop and before we continue, if you have a prayer need, make sure that you shoot me a message. We like to pray for you. Si usted tiene una necesidad de oración, envíame un mensaje que oramos por usted. Amen. And so let's read 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1 and 2. Vamos a leerlo. Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. Dice así. Ténganos los hombres por ministros de Cristo y dispensadores de los misterios de Dios. Mas ahora se requiere en los dispensadores que cada uno sea hallado fiel. And excuse me. Paul speaking to this church. Now we want to talk about this church because we've been studying, we've been discussing that this church was after wisdom and philosophies. Because Corinthian was a place of market, of a city like New York that was, full of commerce, and it was a prosperous city, and people were educated, and they were into learning and looking for wisdom and philosophies. So the church, the brothers and sisters in the church, they had grown up in these teachings. So they had the same expectations because, when you come to Christ, you come with a lot of baggage from your culture, from your upbringing. And these things, they stay with you until you start, dying to them. La iglesia de Corintio, pues hemos hablado de que esta iglesia, pues, estaba situada en un lugar de comercio, una ciudad que era como Nueva York popular, tremenda. Entonces, pues, había mucho negocio ahí, mucha prosperidad, y la gente, pues, estaban detrás de las filosofías y de la sabiduría. Entonces, esta iglesia, pues, los miembros, los hermanos, pues, estaban en eso. Ellos pues, tenían todavía esa filosofía, esos deseos de adquirir sabiduría. So, Pablo tenía que bregar con esta iglesia para cambiar y hacer que esta iglesia, pues, prosperada. And so the church, the congregates of Corinthian, they were, they dealt with pride. They had a problem with pride. Estos miembros de esta iglesia, pues, tenían un problemita con el orgullo. Y, pues, Pablo tuvo que bregar con esto. En este capítulo, pues, Pablo, pues, tuvo que instruir a esta iglesia, a estos hermanos, a que miraran al ministro como con honor, porque tenían que respetar el ministro, tenían que ver que el ministro, pues, estaba en una posición superior a ellos, y ellos, pues, no les gustaba eso mucho. These members of this church, they had to acknowledge that Paul was the minister, he was the apostle, and so were the other ministers, and the members had to learn to look up to the pastor, because remember, they're puffed up, they're full of wisdom, they think that they're the smartest people in the planet. Esta gente, pues, se creían que eran lo más sabio del mundo. So a Pablo ahora venir y decirle, bueno, aquí está el pastor, tienen que mirarlo como pastor. Paul had to come and tell this church, you guys, this is your pastor, and you have to look up to him as your pastor. And so they clashed with that. And so God is the one that counted Paul faithful. So in this chapter, as you read this chapter, you're going to see that no one had to designate Paul as faithful because the testimony that God gave out of Paul was that he was faithful. So en este capítulo, pues, si lo lees, pues vas a ver que Pablo, pues, le dice a esta iglesia que el único que da testimonio de la fidelidad de Pablo era Dios. Dios es el que da testimonio de la fidelidad. And then we see in this chapter that Paul speaks about, his track record of faithfulness. There's an end point to this in this chapter. Pablo, pues, en este capítulo, pues, le termina con deletrando su fidelidad. Y eso es importante en los fieles, en los que son servidores de Dios. That's important in those that serve God, to be found faithful. And so we want to talk a little bit about ministers, because remember, Paul is trying to teach this church to look up to the minister. Queremos hablar un poquito del ministro, porque Pablo le está tratando de enseñar a esta iglesia que ellos tienen que respetar al ministro. So what is the minister? You go to a church and they say, this is the minister, this is the pastor. So what is it? What is that? So a minister is anyone who aids another in any work. So he's just a servant. He just serves everyone. He just helps everyone in what they're doing, just so that they can prosper. Un ministro, pues, es un servidor. Uno que busca ayudar a todos los demás, que ellos prosperen en el ministerio, en cualquier cosa que ellos se embarquen a hacer. El ministro, pues, está supuesto a ayudarle. The minister, whatever anyone, embarks himself to do in the church, or in anything, the pastor is the one that's supposed to help them. This is contrary to many of today's pastors, where they expect the church to serve him, where he is supposed to serve the church. He is supposed to serve the congregants. Esto es en contra de lo de hoy en día, de lo que vemos, que los pastores hoy en día pues piensan que la iglesia tiene que servirle a ellos. No es así. El pastor sirve a la iglesia. And then we see the next word is steward. And steward is kind of like a manager. He handles everything, that keeps this house running. He keeps the church running. He just doesn't work with people, but he also, has to deal with the finances and make sure that there's somebody responsible there, and that, he holds everybody accountable, and he manages, he designates people to work and to help around the church. So ahí tenemos el servidor, y este servidor, pues, es alguien que maneja la iglesia, mayordomo. Y pues, designe oficios y busca ayuda para mantener y para que la iglesia siga corriendo. And then we asked the question, what trademark do ministers and all servants have? So, hicimos esta pregunta a la iglesia y se la hacemos a ustedes. ¿Qué es lo que hace que cada ministro tiene que tener? And we're going to look at Romans chapter 3 in a minute, chapter 13, verse 7 in a second. But there's something that each minister has to have. And each one has to be found faithful. Cada ministro tiene que ser encontrado fiel. But to be recognized as faithful, to be honored as a minister, something has to happen. Para ser honrado, pues algo tiene que suceder. And, the Bible tells us that we need to honor the ministers. That, those that deserve honor, we have to honor those. In Romans chapter 13, We're going to read verse 7, Romanos capítulo 13, verso 7. Render therefore to all their dues. Tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. Oopsie. So, ríndele a cada uno lo que merece. Y tributo a tributo, costumbre a costumbre, temor a temor y honor a honor. O sea, cada persona tiene que recibir su lo que merece. Every person has to receive what he deserves. And so if a minister is to be honored, then we have to honor them. We have to learn to look up to that person because God put him there. Tenemos que aprender a mirar a esa persona porque Dios lo puso ahí. But the trademark that each minister and servant must have is faithfulness. And it's amazing because we all have some sort of faithfulness. We're all faithful to something. Whether you're faithful to your job, you're faithful to your spouse, you're faithful to the chores in your home, you're faithful to class, you're faithful to you're faithful to something. Tú eres fiel a algo. Fiel a la escuela, fiel a tu matrimonio, fiel al trabajo, fiel a los hijos. Usted tiene un grado de fidelidad que usted lo atribute donde usted quiera. And you can be very faithful, or you could be just a little bit faithful. Or you could be unfaithful too. Uno puede ser bien fiel, o un poquito fiel, o infiel. Tú decides el grado de fidelidad que usted quiere dar. But what does the word mean, faithful? ¿Qué es lo que quiere decir fiel? So I looked it up. Excuse me. And this definition, worthy of trust, that can be relied on. Somebody who deserves that you trust him. Alguien que tú puedas confiar. Es una definición de fidelidad. And then this other one kind of made my marbles turn. Easily persuaded, believing, confiding, trusting. Fácilmente persuadido, creyendo, confiando. And I was thinking, easily persuaded, so a person that's faithful, when you come to the truth to them, you don't have to give a lot of detail. That person, because he's faithful and he'll believe you, he'll be that, it's a trademark of faithfulness. It reveals his faithfulness. Una persona que es fácilmente persuadida, usted viene con algo y esa persona te cree rápido. O sea, no tienes que buscar mucho para persuadirlo, porque esa es fidelidad en él. And then you have firm in adherence to promises or in observance of duty. So, una persona que es firme en su promesa. So when you say something, you go and you do what you say. That's faithfulness. Cuando tú dices algo que vas a hacer, te ves obligado a hacerlo, lo tienes que hacer. Eso es fidelidad. Y eso es importante para nosotros. Because, that's important for us because, there's a lot of people that say that they're going to do stuff and they don't do it. So you start to see faithfulness decline. Uno empieza a ver la fidelidad declinar. Cuando dice algo y no lo haces. Cuando haces promesas y no las cumples. We've been taking it for granted. So now we're accepting. We're an accepting society. So now we accept when people say that they're going to do something and they don't, it's okay. You know what? I'll do it myself. We don't hold people accountable. En esta sociedad, pues estamos en una sociedad que acepta las cosas. Y ahora, pues si alguien dice que va a hacer algo y no lo cumple, pues dice, está bien, no te preocupes, lo hago yo. Y ya, pues estamos una aceptancia en la infidelidad. And so we find more and more people today are less faithful than they were 10 years ago, even 20 years ago. Vemos que hay más personas en estos días que son infieles en estos días que 10 o 20 años atrás. But faithfulness is something that God is looking for. It's a trademark. It's something that God is looking for and is earnestly seeking from man. Fidelidad es algo que Dios está buscando de los hombres. ¿Tú quieres saber cómo es que Dios coge a las personas? Te voy a enseñar. You want to know how God selects people? I'm going to show you. Let's go to Psalms 101, verse 6. El Salmo 101, verso 6. Mine eyes shall be upon the faithful of the land, that they may dwell with me. He that walketh in a perfect way, he shall serve me. Dice, mis ojos pondré en los fieles de la tierra, para que estén conmigo. El que anduviere en el camino de la perfección, este me servirá. And so, God is seeking for faithful people. God is seeking for people that are, when they say that they're going to do stuff, that they do it. Dios está buscando a gente que sean fieles. Que cuando dicen que van a hacer algo, que lo cumplan. Esas son las personas que Dios llama. Esas son las personas que el ojo del Señor está buscando. Those are the people that God is looking for. So, if you haven't been faithful, let's say to church, you haven't been faithful going to church, but you know what? God is not going to be so much into you. Because, He's looking for faithful people. Now, it depends your reasons and what's going on in your life, and He knows your heart. Si tú te estás fallando en la fidelidad y quizá pues ya dejaste ir de la iglesia, pues ya Dios pues no está muy interesado en estar atrás de ti, a menos que tú tengas una razón y sabes, Dios conoce tu corazón, pero cuando tú empiezas a dejar a Dios y empiezas a dejar serle fiel y empiezas a rechazarlo, pues Dios pues te va a dejar de mano. Pero Dios no va a seguir peleando contigo. When you start leaving God and you start moving away from Him, then you know what? He's not going to fight with you. But, it's a requirement of the servant of God to be faithful. Es un requisito del servidor de Dios que sea fiel. And we see this in Timothy when Paul writes to the church in Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 through 7. It's a lot of verses, but we're going to just try to read it as quickly as we can to look at, these characteristics or these requirements for the faithful. Estos requisitos de los fieles. This is a true saying. If a man decides the office of bishop, He desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not given to wine, no sticker, no greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he falls into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Dice, palabra fiel, si alguno aptece obispado, buena obra desea. Conviene pues que el obispo sea irreprensible, marido de una mujer, solícito, templado, compuesto, hospedador, apto para enseñar, no amador del vino, no heredoro, no codicioso de torpe ganancia, sino moderado, no litigioso, ajeno de avaricia, que gobierne bien su casa, que tenga a sus hijos en sujeción con toda honestidad. Porque el que no sabe gobernar su casa, ¿cómo cuidará de la iglesia de Dios? No un neófito, porque infladado no cae de juicio en el juicio del diablo. También conviene que tenga un buen testimonio de los extraños, para que no caiga en frente y en lazo del diablo. And so that's what a servant is. That's the requirement that the Bible says of the servant. And this is that's for the bishop, but that's the same that is applied to the believer, to the person that wants to serve Christ. Eso pues se aplica al obispado, pero también al servidor de Cristo. Que si tú quieres ser un servidor fiel, pues tienes que ser fiel. Tiene tiene unos requisitos que tienes que cumplir. There are some requirements that you gotta kind of fulfill. Now, Paul's record of, his track record of faithfulness, because he was challenged by this church. Era retado con esta iglesia. Porque esta iglesia pues le dio problemita porque ellos eran un poquito orgullosos. This church gave them a little hard time because, they were full of pride. And so Paul starts telling this church, you know what? I've been suffering still. We've been suffering still to this date. We've been working hard, with this ministry. We haven't had much help. We've been mistreated. We've been defamed, continuously, even until now. Pablo en este capítulo pues empieza a decirle de lo que está pasando en él y cómo él y los ministros que estaban con él siguieron fiel. Sufriendo menosprecio, sufriendo falta, necesidad, sin casi ninguna ayuda, siendo defamado, lo maltrataron y ellos continuaron siendo fiel. And it teaches us that no matter what happens in your life, no matter what sickness comes your way, if you're going to be faithful to God, you're going to be faithful to God. You're not going to stop being faithful because you got sick. You're not going to stop being faithful because, they're mistreating you in your job. You're not going to stop being faithful when people defame you, when people rob you, when people do bad things to you, when people try to stop you from going to church, when you're not going to stop being faithful to God. Because that is already something that you have built yourself, molded yourself to be. Uno no va a dejar de serle fiel a Dios porque te están defamando, porque te están bufeando, porque te están maltratando en el trabajo, porque te están haciendo trampa, porque te están haciendo cosas que no deben hacerte. Uno no va a dejar de ser fiel al Señor por esas cositas. Some people come to church and then they stop coming for like weeks and they have their excuses and they find themselves not being faithful to God. God, you have to be faithful all the time. Even in church or out of church or wherever you go, you want to be faithful to God. That when the situation comes your way where you're tempted to do stuff that you shouldn't do, you're faithful. Your faithfulness to God will stop you from doing the things you shouldn't do. Tu fidelidad a Dios se tiene que mantener. Nada más porque quizá te maltratan o viene la tentación, uno no puede dejar de ser fiel al Señor. Uno tiene que seguir siéndole fiel al Señor. Porque ya eso uno ha decidido que va a serle fiel. So, if you want to join us on Sundays, welcome to join us. We're at 6111 with Grand, and we are ambassadors of Christ, and we hope that you decide that you want to be a part of something greater, something that you can prove your faithfulness to God. You can show and model, to others that you are faithful to God. Deseamos que usted sea parte de algo mayor, que usted decida serle fiel al Señor y que usted decida venir a embajadores de Cristo para que sea parte de algo mayor, más grande, que usted pueda serle fiel al Señor allí en la iglesia y mostrarle a todo el mundo que tú estás sirviéndole al Señor. Because, in the latter times, when we come before the Lord, He's either going to say, come into your rest. You were faithful in the little, and I will place you over much. Or He could say, well, I never knew you. Quizá en el último día, pues, cuando vengas delante del Señor, le pueda decir, buen, fiel siervo, en lo poquito has sido fiel, en lo mucho te pondré. O te pueda decir, pues, nunca te conocí. God bless you. Thank you for joining us. Like us, share us. Somebody needs to hear. Somebody needs to be blessed. And I hope that you bless someone. Compártanos. Bendiga a alguien, porque alguien necesita ser bendecido. Dios te bendiga. God bless you.